Hi guys, welcome to the Synthetic Native Podcast. I'm Thomas Grice, and we're going to do a little bit of a shorter, different episode today. I'm just going to talk about a couple of VR research topics that I've been, not topics, actual studies that I've been looking at lately, and I'm going to try to digest them and share them for you. This is kind of new for me. I think I'm going to enjoy it, and hopefully I won't screw up the studies too much. And if there's interest in this, I will do more in the future. It's really cool for me to get to read about these studies and share them with you. Reading research stuff can be a little bit dry, and I know sometimes it's nice to have other people sort of digest it and regurgitate it, and so that's kind of my goal with this series if it does become a series. I still want to keep the podcast pretty guest focused and try to have people on for most episodes, but I think every once in a while doing an episode like this where I talk about or report on local VR or advanced interface technology happenings is pretty cool, so I will try to do that for you. Okay, so the first study that I read, and this is actually a research paper published at York St. John University, or by some people at York St. John University in the UK, Matthew Coxon, Nathan Kelly, and Sarah Page. And the title of the paper is Individual Differences in Virtual Reality. Are Spatial Presence and Spatial Ability Linked? And if you don't know what presence is, I think it's occasionally defined slightly differently, but the gist of it is it's the feeling of being spatially located within a virtual space. So the feeling once you're kind of in a virtual reality environment that you are really in it spatially, and that you can kind of look around and feel like you have a good feeling of the distance between you and objects, and you can navigate it in a spatial sense, that you really feel like you're there sort of physically. And so this, there's some nuance to that. I shouldn't say physically because there are other senses that may not be triggered. You might have a strong sense of presence in an environment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're feeling the maximum amount of immersion. But presence is a really big component of being in virtual reality environments, and it correlates with some other sort of desired aspects of virtual reality experiences that many VR developers and creators want to nurture and create for people. And so in this study, what they did was they tried to correlate a user's self-reported spatial abilities, basically somebody's ability to reason about like shapes and topology with their feeling of being spatially present inside of a virtual reality environment. So what they did was they asked the users, the participants, there was about 50 participants, they asked them to self-report on their ability or their spatial abilities. So they asked them questions, or they gave them statements, and they asked them to rate them through like 1 through 5, how much they agreed with the statement. Here's an example of such a statement. When someone shows me a blueprint, I am able to imagine the space easily. So you can imagine that somebody might say 1, if they strongly disagreed and they didn't really feel like they're able to visualize or imagine a space just given a blueprint, or they might answer 5 if they felt like they had really strong spatial abilities and they felt like they were able to do something like that, like look at an architectural blueprint and really imagine the space just from that in their mind's eye. So that was the part where the participant self-reports on how good they think they are at spatial reasoning. It doesn't prove anything necessarily in and of itself about how good their spatial reasoning is, but it is data on how good they think that they are. And then they gave them 2 tests to kind of, instead of self-reporting their abilities, to kind of test their abilities. And these, the first test was the mental rotations test. And basically what this is you have a shape, a target shape, and then you have a couple of shapes that are either a rotation of that shape or a shape that kind of looks like some sort of permutation or rotation of that shape, but only one or two of the options are actual rotations of that shape. And so you score higher on that test if you're able to identify the shapes that are rotations of the target shape and not just, not select the wrong ones. And then the Four Mountains test. The Four Mountains test is where, this is the last test that they gave them. This is a test where you see a computer-generated image of like some mountains coming out of the ground, and then you see a couple more images. And similar to the first test, you have to match with the ones that are an actual permutation of the image that you saw. Like they might be from a slightly different angle, slightly different lighting, maybe some different vegetation, but it's the same basic topology that you saw in the first picture. So they would show you this first picture of the mountains for about 20 seconds, and then they would give you some amount of time to select the matching images out of the answer choices that you had. And again, you get a higher score if you're able to match those, because the idea is that you have some sort of basically better ability to reason about or remember the topology of those mountains or those landscapes. So once they do that, then they run you through 2 simulations using a Oculus DK2. One of them is sitting on a metro, basically sitting on a train, a kind of a more passive simulator experience, and then another one where you're walking through a city and somebody hands you a photo of somebody to find that person in the city, and the idea is you walk through the city and you're like looking for that person. And that one is a little bit more demanding of the user to focus and be sort of engaged with this simulator experience. And what they found kind of raised as many questions as it answered. What they found was there was not a strong correlation between the test that they gave them and the ability for that person to feel a high degree of presence inside of the virtual environment. They did find that there seemed to be a correlation between a person's self-reported ability to spatially reason and their ability to feel present in the environment. And basically what this means is if a person thought that they were good at spatial reasoning, regardless of how they did on the Four Mountains test or the shape rotation test, that seemed to correlate with their ability to be spatially present inside of the environment. So this raises questions like, well, maybe the types of things that we associate with spatial reasoning that are being tested by those tests are not the same things that are required to feel spatially present inside of a virtual environment, which might be counterintuitive because you'd think that those things are linked. So the authors note that, and it just raises a lot of questions for how we can what is it exactly that enables us to be present within virtual environments. One interesting note is that they also asked the users how much they played video games, like yearly, monthly, weekly, every day, how often do they do it? And there seemed to be a strong link. I don't want to say strong link. I can't remember exactly how strong the link was, but it was a similar to the link between their self-reported ability to spatially reason. There seemed to be also a link between gaming, the rate of how much they game, and their ability to become spatially present in these virtual environments. And the obvious thing that you might think there is, well, if somebody games a lot, maybe they're used to kind of engaging with these types of virtual environments, and it's easy for them to just transition from the real world into these virtual environments more seamlessly or something. So kind of ties us into our next study. Actually, for this one, I couldn't find a published research paper on this study, and the details surrounding it aren't super interesting. But basically, the takeaway is that VR experiences, or at least the one developed by this studio called, I lost the name. Anyway, I will put a link to it in the description, and if you're interested, you can find the name there. But anyway, there was a game that they created that was shown to be, after a couple of sessions, about twice as effective as morphine for pain patients. And as you can imagine, the implications of that are pretty huge. There's been, pretty bad opioid epidemic in the United States, in certain regions of the country, and alternatives to any sort of addictive pain medication are interesting in the medical field. And this obviously would be pretty cheap to produce. You just need you create the software or the experience, and then all you have to do is put on a headset, and then you can be immersed in this world. And this is useful for people like burn patients and people that have to undergo really painful like stuff like when you get a burn, or you have like an infected wound and they need to clean the wound or clean your burns. Like, these processes are really, really painful, can be really, really painful for the patient, even with pain medication. And so the fact that this is shown in some cases apparently to be more effective than pain medication at treating the pain or providing pain relief is really, really significant, especially as we start to answer, or the question has started to be asked more and more, what are the applications of virtual reality outside of gaming and cinematic experiences? Well, the medical field more and more looks like a valid place to start mining for interesting ideas and products. Okay, so kind of the takeaway from those two studies that I mentioned is this idea of being present within a virtual environment can have some really interesting implications. For one, how do you get people to be present within a virtual environment? How do you get that spatial feeling of presence? Personally, for me, it's always been pretty easy to get spatially present as long as the experience of using the hardware feels good, and there's a close relationship between how I'm moving and how I'm moving physically and how I'm moving in the world. Something that really made that click for me was when I put on the HTC Vive for the first time, and I could see my sort of hands moving in a one-to-one manner with the physical world and in the virtual world. That was a really amazing experience, and I think that we've kind of made a lot of progress in being able to create very immersive environments. So the real question, and the thing that I think the second study starts to answer a little bit more, is what are the applications for VR outside of gaming and whatnot. And it's just cool that we're seeing a medical application, and I've heard about some other potential medical applications. So it's really exciting to see where this is going. Of course, as I talked about on the last episode with Eric Newman, we have to worry about things like simulator sickness. Obviously, you can think about the disaster of giving a simulator sickness inducing experience to a patient who is already maybe feeling nauseous or in discomfort. So there's a lot of interesting design challenges for people who are going to be creating these products and then distributing them. One more thing before we end the podcast. There was a press release by Valve, and it looks like they're going to be offering core components in addition to what they were already offering earlier this year, which is they were licensing out their sort of advanced tracking technology. And now they're going to be offering LCDs, OLEDs, OLEDs, and custom lenses for Steam VR compatible head-mounted displays. And I'm not sure exactly if this means that they are going to be themselves manufacturing the LCDs and OLEDs. That's what it sounded like in the press release. I'm a little bit fuzzy on those details, but the cool part about this, they're also going to be offering obviously a lot of software support and a reference design for their their Watchman technology, which is basically, my understanding is it's like the hardware, maybe even the chip that goes in their I believe it goes in their headset. I'm not 100% sure, but the point is that this is a big step for Valve in kind of creating an open marketplace where you can imagine a lot of the development of the past 30 years plus in software has been because of open source technology. And so this is really cool for them to, maybe it's not quite open source, but for them to be opening up that technology and potentially allowing other people to innovate and use their technology. I could see Valve really stepping up and playing with the big boys if this takes off and if VR does end up growing as much as it is projected to. So this seems like a really, really smart move for them. I think other companies like Microsoft and Facebook are taking a more closed approach to their VR technology. So for me personally, even though I'm an Oculus owner, it's a really big draw for me, and I am looking forward to see what happens next with Valve in this more open VR componentry. So yeah, that's everything for today. This was definitely a new kind of learning experience for me to share some of this VR research and news with you. If you have any type of critique or questions or suggestions, comments, anything, please share them with me. I'd love to hear them from you. If you aren't already subscribed, please subscribe. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, under Synthetic Native. Really appreciate any and all feedback. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.